I'm Sarah from Somatic Movement Center. I'm a clinical somatic educator, and I teach people how to relieve their chronic pain by releasing their muscle tension and retraining their posture and movement patterns. Today I'm going to talk about pelvic rotation. This is different than pelvic torsion, in which the pelvis is twisted like this. So when I say pelvic rotation, I mean what happens when the whole pelvis turns to the left or the right on the transverse plane. This is the movement your pelvis would make if you were doing the twist. You can also imagine a record player or a lazy Susan. So when the pelvis turns to the right, the left hip shifts forward and the right hip shifts backward. When the pelvis turns to the left, the right hip shifts forward and the left hip shifts backward. If chronic muscle tension is keeping you stuck in either of these positions, the misalignment will affect your entire body. Now, having some small degree of pelvic rotation is really common, and it tends to occur along with some other types of misalignment. It also tends to occur along with some common pain conditions. These include misalignment and pain in the hips, knees, and ankles, pronation in one foot and supination in the other, functional leg length discrepancy, which is also called lateral pelvic tilt, lower back pain, scoliosis, pelvic torsion, sacroiliac joint dysfunction and pain, iliotibial band syndrome, and snapping hip syndrome. So now I want to talk about the pattern of muscle tension that causes pelvic rotation. The major muscle groups involved in this pattern are the obliques, the extensors of the lumbar spine and hip, and the hip rotators. The internal and external obliques work together to rotate the spine to either side. Now, if I were to tell you to stand up and rotate your spine to the right and the left so that you could feel your obliques working, you'd most likely keep your pelvis in place and turn your rib cage and shoulders to the right and left. But in the pattern of pelvic rotation, the obliques contract and turn the pelvis to one side or the other. Now onto the extensors of the lower back and hip. When the extensors of the lower back contract, they arch the lower back. When the extensors of the hip contract, they bring the hip and leg backward. In pelvic rotation, both of these actions are happening on the side of the body in which the hip is shifted backward. I'm going to put a list of the extensor muscles on the screen right here. If your pelvis is turned to the right, these muscles will be chronically tight on your right side. If your pelvis is turned to the left, these muscles will be tight on your left side. Now let's talk about the hip rotators. Some rotation of the hip joints is always present in pelvic rotation. If your pelvis is turned to the right, the external rotators of the right hip are contracted, while the internal rotators of the left hip are contracted. If your pelvis is turned to the left, the external rotators of the left hip are contracted, while the internal rotators of the right hip are contracted. Now there's one more possible scenario. What if the driving force in the rotation of the pelvis isn't coming from the obliques, or from one hip being pulled backward by the extensors, or from the hip joints rotating? It's also possible that pelvic rotation can be driven by the hip that is shifted forward. In this case, it's likely that there's a downward pulling action occurring on that side, pulling the rib cage closer to the hip and shifting it forward. The muscles involved in that pattern of tension are the obliques, iliopsoas, and rectus abdominis. So why do the muscles of our core and hips become tight enough to cause pelvic rotation? And why does it happen to some people and not others? Well, the movement and level of contraction of our muscles is controlled by our nervous system. The way that our muscles move and how much we keep them contracted is actually learned over time by our nervous system. Our nervous system learns certain ways of using our muscles based on how we choose to sit, stand, and move every day. Our nervous system notices the postures and movements that we tend to repeat, and it gradually makes these postures and movements automatic so that we don't have to consciously think about them. This learning process, which is developing muscle memory, allows us to go through the activities in our daily lives easily and efficiently. Unfortunately, if we tend to repeat unnatural postures or movements, our nervous system will learn those too. Our automatic neuromuscular learning process doesn't choose between what is good or bad for us. It just notices what we tend to repeat and makes it automatic. So if you carry your bag on the same side every day, hold your child on the same hip, kick a ball with the same leg, or sit at your desk in the same way, your nervous system can easily habituate the pattern of holding your pelvis rotated to one side or the other. As your nervous system gradually learns to keep your muscles tight, gamma loop activity will adapt. This feedback loop in your nervous system regulates the level of tension in your muscles. As your brain keeps sending the message to contract your muscles, gamma loop activity adapts and starts keeping your muscles tight all the time. Meanwhile, your proprioception, which is your internal sense of your body position, adapts too. So as your nervous system gradually starts holding your pelvis in a rotated position, it will feel to you like it's aligned correctly. Your proprioception also adapts to the increased level of tension in your muscles, so you won't be aware that your muscles are gradually getting tighter and tighter. So if you're familiar with clinical somatics, you know we use the movement technique of pandiculation to release chronic muscle tension and retrain learned postural patterns. Pandiculation reduces the resting level of tension in your muscles being set by your nervous system, and it allows you to retrain your muscle memory. If you're not familiar with pandiculation, you can read my article, What is Pandiculation?, which is on my website, and I'll link to it below as well. And you can also listen to my new podcast on Spotify, the Soma Podcast. The second episode is about pandiculation. On my website, I have an article about pelvic rotation, and in the article, I give specific suggestions about which clinical somatics exercises you should practice if you have pelvic rotation. Some of them you can practice equally with both sides, and I also describe how you can practice certain exercises more with your right or left side, depending on which direction your pelvis is turned to. I'm linking to this article in the video description below as well, and here's the list of exercises. It's also important that you either watch my video, How to Even Out the Imbalances in Your Body, or read my article with the same name. This article and video give essential advice that you should follow when you're tailoring your clinical somatics practice to address the imbalances in your muscular patterns. And if you want to learn more about how clinical somatics works, you can read my book, The Pain Relief Secret, which is available on Amazon, and you can visit my website, somaticmovementcenter.com. Thanks for watching.